probably all know who I am, but for maybe those watching the recording at some point in the future, I'm Hunter, and so I work for a company called DIBA. I'll go into what we do later on in the presentation, and I've spent most of my career as a developer. I've spent most of it in JavaScript, but I kind of transitioned to Rust probably about halfway through now. Now it's halfway. And Rust is more of like a systems programming language than like JavaScript is more for like, I don't know, like making snow on your web page or like trailing stars after your cursor. So like what we used to call DHTML, that's what JavaScript's good for. And anyway, so I started kind of getting into shitcoins back in like 2017. First with Ethereum and Web3, and then Filecoin 2021. Worked on the protocol level with Filecoin. Learned a lot about decentralized storage doing that, and that would later come to be really helpful for some of the stuff later on that we'll see in this presentation. I discovered RGB I would say about 3 years ago also, and it really did kind of solidify my conviction as a Bitcoin maximalist in ways that kind of annoyed a lot of my friends, but it just makes a lot of sense once you figure it out. You're like, oh wow, we can do everything all the other shitcoins do just on layers. And so anyway, I also help with RGB design and review. So RGB is a reference to colored coins, and also it's like RGB technically stands for really good for Bitcoin, but it's originally kind of came out of an idea that's like just a lineage of ideas that came from early attempts at adding another unit of account to Bitcoin, which like for example, the original Tether issuance. USDT was done on a colored coin protocol called Omnilayer, which was recently discontinued, but for the longest time and it still is. It still has redeemability for US dollars, and it was issued on Bitcoin originally. This was like 2013, way before Ethereum. And so Jimmy Song, he did a lot of work on colored coins early on. I mean, I'm sure you all heard his name, but like that was kind of his claim to fame. And early on was like that he was involved in some of those early projects, and they failed due to three reasons. He said. One is, they were working on several different standards. They were about 5 or 6 different on-chain protocols for just describing how, like, what a coin is, like what a different unit of account is, and how to transfer it. There was also no marketing in like, which is fair, because they didn't have, like a big budget like Ethereum did. But they also didn't, they didn't mint 72 million ETH. Pre-mine, exactly. And of course, they were also a little early. There was just not, like, the market wasn't ready for it at that stage at that time, and it just wasn't quite clear what they would really be useful for. And why do they want colored coins? There's just this general sense that we denominate things in Bitcoins, and sometimes you know what? Let me just go into the next slide, because sometimes it's difficult to justify shitcoinery, right, as a Bitcoin maximalist. But first of all, people want them. There's a bunch of people who really want them, and they really want to do it on Bitcoin, and they're going to do it whether we like it or not. We also live in a world of shitcoins, I mean, you could forego furniture and food and living in shelter, but I like having those things. I'm sure most people do, and those are things that you buy that aren't Bitcoin. And when you go to buy something, it's helpful to have kind of a proof of purchase. And this is something that we kind of, it's kind of invisible in our ordinary transactions and every day, but it's a thing that we get during the course of business. And what would be really nice is in the same transaction that you're sending your Bitcoin, you're also able to receive a proof of purchase, which we'll get into later on. Altruism also is kind of an interesting angle. The patronage model, from the Renaissance era of people commissioning great works and getting renown and keeping track of those great works over time using a system of provenance. Those records, and renown and all that, those could be accounted for using a centralized state-backed system, or we could, with more modern technology, we could potentially disintermediate the state from those responsibilities. And I think in the coming years, as Bitcoin's price appreciates, and there's often this question of where are we going? How are we going to get all Bitcoin into the hands of everyone else after hyper-Bitcoinization, or as the price appreciates so much that as fiat's collapsing, it's going to be kind of concentrated in the hands of a few people. And I think the patronage model could be one answer to that. Basically, there's just philanthropy or whatever could go on there could be supported by NFTs. And so, what is RGB? It is. This is a very. I get asked this question a lot. It's not an easy answer, but it is a generalized smart contract protocol, or we just actually these days we usually just omit the smart. It's just contracts and contracts on Bitcoin. And you might have also heard of another protocol out there called Taproot Assets, or some affectionately call it TA or TAPAS. And it's only good for assets, only good for tokens essentially. Whereas RGB is a lot more generalized, and it's a different approach to solving that same problem as well. It uses this paradigm of client-side validation, and that means that contract execution occurs in the wallet itself. And so it doesn't occur in a node, it doesn't occur in some server, it occurs in your wallet. And we take the things that normally happen in nodes as you were to transfer a token or interact with a contract, we take those parts, we put it in the wallet itself, and then we basically secure that by Bitcoin. And we have this concept of separation of state and ownership at that point. we're securing the ownership with Bitcoin using a UTXO, and we're keeping the state separate, and that state is sharded amongst contract owners, in that you can essentially distribute the problem of keeping track of state within the system over time. And so that you only need to know the history of the token holders that had the tokens that you have before you. But you don't need to know the token histories of everyone else's tokens in order to validate your own tokens, your own token supply. And these are bearer contracts, so they're kind of similar to, like conceptually to what the Dutch traders used, the Dutch East India Company, the most successful company in the world actually. They would use these like contracts that they weren't necessarily, there was no single like property register. Like you had to have this contract in your possession, and you would sign it over to people, and they would have it, and then that would be a bearer contract. And so, and what's interesting also is, since you're taking this data and you're putting it in your own custody, you're taking it off chain, off the responsibility of a node, and into your own wallet, then you have really strong privacy. Because you're keeping the information to yourself, you're not sharing it with anybody who isn't involved in that transaction. So nobody else needs to know if you wanted to if you have a tractor sale out in the woods somewhere, and you're trying to sell a tractor to someone, but you want to have a record of that sale, of that transfer. So you'll send your Bitcoin. You'll get the receipt in return, but the state doesn't need to know about this unless you wanted to show it to somebody else. And that's the thing about privacy. It's not like the same as secrecy. It's more like it's optional. Like it's within your capability to consent to revealing data to people who might be interested. And and most importantly, it's Bitcoin only. And so we just there's no gas token. There's no need for the concept of gas. Contract execution happens within the wallet. So the reason why gas is a thing in Ethereum's space is because it has this fatal flaw of having the capability to, if you wrote a contract with a while loop in it, you said while true, it could just spin forever and just chew up the node, and it would DDoS everybody else wanting to use it. And so instead, they would use a scarce resource, way or ETH, and they would instead, use that as a limiting factor. But the thing is, you don't really need that if it happens in just your wallet, because, okay, well, what's the worst thing that happen? Your wallet crashes. Okay, well, that does suck, but it doesn't deny service to everybody else using this protocol. And so it really does limit the damage that could be caused by any bad actor, just because of how distributed and decentralized even the issuance is, and the execution of these contracts occurs within anybody using this protocol. RGB20 is a token standard that we've developed, and there's actually several tokens. There's several different standards. RGB20 is for fungible tokens. RGB21 is for non-fungible tokens. I'll get into that. RGB22 is for decentralized or digital identity, and we won't be getting into that yet, but there's quite a few other contract standards that we've kind of come up with to potentially provide utility to those who might need that kind of functionality, I suppose. Now, RGB 20, you specify, certain things like the name of the token, how many tokens there'll be, how many tokens can be subdivided by. Can they be subdivided into bits or sats? 8 or 6, right? And you put this in what's called global state. This is state that basically everybody who has this contract will all have that same state, and then they'll also have some kind of metadata that's issued against a UTXO, and that UTXO, when that changes, that essentially it proves that first of all the state can be spent by its owner. We have separation of ownership of the state. The state is currently valid, so that basically that means that it can be spent, but it hasn't yet, and there's no other potential conflicting same thing that's out there that could be the same thing. That there's no ambiguity, let's say, of what you were spending. For example, imagine if you could spend the same UTXO twice. That's not a thing that can happen in Bitcoin, but what if you could? That would that would make that a big security flaw. And fortunately, we don't have that, and so that's how we secure things. Double spending and time stamping are also just really good sort of side effects or benefits that we get from anchoring to the Bitcoin time chain. And now, yes?
Quick question on the global state. So you're talking about how within a particular contract, they're sharding amongst a group. And the global state is just this scaled amongst a much larger group. It's kind of...
Yeah, actually, that's not quite the way to conceptualize it. It's just the same data that everybody has that they need to know about that contract.
So global as in parties to the contract.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see. Okay, so just you're referencing it
to be honest, I would probably have called it public state, maybe. That's maybe another way to think of it.
Okay, so you're saying there's a state for any particular contract, any parties that are participating in it, there's a state and there's information that is relevant to all of those that's public, and then aside from that, there's also specific information that is not being pushed into the public state unless necessary.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Essentially, yeah. Exactly. That's a great way to describe that.
And is it just hashed somewhere on the chain that RGB can read the hash, or no?
Well, I'll get into that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a cryptographic commitment. Yeah, and and then RGB 21, it's we like to call them unique digital assets, but they're also known as NFTs. We make use of a lot of the similar standard library between them, but just different metadata properties, attachments, and we can have a embedded preview metadata media type that we can just we can embed up to 16 megabytes of data into the contract itself. So one thing you could do maybe is include a copy of a website in it, and that would be how you do a DApp, is just by including the HTML needed to interact with the contract and inside the contract itself. And then you just distribute the contract and you view it in a web browser and you are you basically have the equivalent of a dApp. And RGB21, I like them a lot because they're non-fungible, and the reason I like NFTs more than I like fungible tokens is because they don't try to be money. And I'm a Bitcoin maxi, and I don't like things that try to be a better money than Bitcoin. I think money, like Bitcoin, is the best money there is, and really the only thing that we need to do is make it easier to do business in Bitcoin and give people more confidence and have more I hate to use the word utility so much, but it really does, like, if you used like anything from the ETH ecosystem, like there is like a level of utility that you don't generally, you kind of lack in some ways as Bitcoiners, I have to admit. And like what's cool is we can essentially do it our own way. We can do it in a way that that doesn't compromise on our principles of privacy and censorship resistance and things of that nature. And but we can still have our cake and eat it too, in a way. We can have these cool things. We can have these nice things now. And one of those nice things is an atomic swap. And so you might have heard of atomic swaps. One thing that is completely, so what is atomicity? It means that something can't be broken down further. And so a deal is atomic if you can't have a partial deal. A transaction's atomic if it can't be a partial transaction. It can't be settled in a partial state. And so when you have a buyer and a seller interacting, the buyer is spending their money and the seller is selling their product. Ideally, they both spend their UTXOs in the same transaction. And when you do that, they're in the same transaction. The transaction either gets mined or it doesn't. And then if it doesn't get mined, then it's atomic. It's just one single atomic operation. And if you can appreciate how that fits together nicely, just in terms of how that could layer into the ordinary commerce that we do every day, maybe that would get you the gears turning in how RGB could be really useful to making Bitcoin a thing that has a lot more relevance to our daily lives than we might necessarily imagine normally without RGB. RGB also has this thing called contractum. It's a language for specifying contracts. I actually won't go into that. There's actually going to be a few things I won't go into in this presentation because some of this is more technical. But one of these things that I will talk about is are semantic IDs. These are kind of neat. So on one of these slides I just breezed past was strict types. And so we basically, in the contract itself, we use a special way of encoding the contract that's very deterministic and reliable. Let's just say it's reliable. And we worked really hard to make sure it was reliable. And because computers can do things that are unreliable, especially when you're working on other people's computers. When you're using a web browser or a mobile device or a desktop server or just whatever, right? That. They always have different contexts, and they'll do different things depending on certain, when you leave things ambiguous, it's called undefined behavior. And so when you have certain undefined behavior, then you open yourself up to a lack of determinism, and that essentially results in, unpredictability, and that's what we want to avoid in contract execution, especially if it's something that you're committing to on-chain. And we create these like semantic IDs that are essentially like a commitment to a data structure. And then we use these IDs to version what version of the protocol we're using. And whenever we update the protocol, we'll know that we're using completely different data structures if any of these things change. And then we'll have a record of when they happened, what version they changed, using this special script that we made in Bitmask Core, which I'll get into. So Taproot DPCs. So we use Taproot to make these deterministic Bitcoin commitments that allow you to create a cryptographic commitment, something that you can prove cryptographically, which is different than being able to prove, say, through game theory, economically or incentives, right? It's something you can prove just using math. These in order to prove your contract data, your contract state, you essentially it all kind of boils into this semantic ID kind of structure. It's a little bit more complex than that, but it's essentially a hash of the data structure, and it'll then essentially a hash of the contract. And when you have this 32-byte hash, you'll put it into an operatern, and then the operatern is embedded in a leaf of Taproot. So this is a thing that doesn't go onto the Bitcoin blockchain. It's just a thing that we imagine is there. We say we act like it's there, and then we take the end result of it having been there, being the Merkle root of the tap tree. We take that and we use that as the address, and that is essentially the cryptographic commitment, because it includes a operatern with the hash of the contract state. If that makes any sense.
Is that like saying the Bitcoin being the time chain? You're taking the time of Bitcoin and using that as the hash.
Yeah, I mean,
I know where I was in time at that time when this contract was enabled, something like that.
Well, so it's more like this is the state of the contract. This is who's party to the contract, who what it describes, what it is, what its name is, and yes, what time this might have occurred, this transaction occurred. We take all that data and we just hash it, and then we gotta commit to it on chain. And in order to commit to it, we could use an operatern, but if we did that, then people would know we're using an operatern. So instead what we do is we put the operatern in a tap leaf, and then we don't even write it and so we put it in a script path spend, and we just spend the keys. And so that way, we commit to the script in the operatern, but then we only spend the keys.
So you spin from a different path, but because it's committed to already
in an upper,
and it's verifiably that is the state.
Right, exactly. It's dependent on it by the Merkle property, right?
So by putting it into a script path, an operatern, and then you put it into a leaf of the Merkle tree, you're committing to the data in the contract as well as the conditions of the contract, and then that's why you would put it into the operatern in the script path before you put it into the leaf of the tree. And then by putting it into a leaf of a tree, it's as if on chain, it's kind of like hiding in a crowd a bit, and people could provably say based on the root, then they could choose to reveal if they need to in a dispute what the conditions and the information in the contract would need to be.
Yeah, that's I think that's a fair way to say it.
But even when you spend it, you don't reveal that except to the parties.
Right.
Party does.
Right. It really is like just used to prove that like this data existed in this way.
Mm.
And I guess that doesn't blow your mind. The next slide will. The next thing is we can actually, since we can put them into these trees, these binary trees, we can actually embed over 250,000 DBCs, deterministic Bitcoin commitments, into the same like cryptographic commitment. Which is like that Merkle root. We can put like, you know, like 250,000 different like tap leaves, right? And those are basically for every different contract. So you could basically keep over 250,000 different contracts states committed to. And so what that would be is like, you know, like however many different tokens you had, or different types of property, different houses, different paintings, different, I don't know, receipts even. Like, I mean, eventually you might run out of them, but then you just need another UTXO to keep your NPCs on, your assets on. And so we like to think that it allows us to, like, we could, if we wanted to, we could, with multi-protocol commitments, take every contract that was ever issued on Ethereum and put it into a single Bitcoin block.
Right.
Yeah.
And
If I, like,
go ahead.
well, I'm struggling to ask the question because I feel so ignorant of the whole thing, but like,
Go ahead.
if you are, me being completely ignorant of the situation,
Sure.
where am I going to find the data that what you, like, if you say this thing happened, where do I go to find that you're telling me this?
So you'll get it from the peer, like the person you're doing business with,
Okay.
like they'll know. And also you can have that, like if you don't trust either yourself or your peer to keep that data available, then we built some tech that will help with that. Before we go into that though, we just wanted to show how we create dust UTXOs for the explicit purpose of, and actually this is not how we actually do it these days. We used random dust amounts now, and we also use kind of like bigger amounts too. But yeah, the idea is to essentially have UTXOs for you to commit to cryptographically, and also this is twice as many as we actually need now. For technical reasons, I won't go into it, but basically we need very few UTXOs in order to do business in RGB. And this is an example of an RGB transfer transaction in the Mempool Explorer. It shows you the scripts, it shows you like, you know, everything that it should look like. And if you've seen, you know, like a Bitcoin transaction, like ordinary Bitcoin transaction, this looks exactly like it. Like, this doesn't look any different really. Like, this is basically as boring as it gets, except for the fact that it's using Taproot. And so, but these include a cryptographic commitment. That push bytes 32, that address, those are 32 bytes. Those include that cryptographic commitment that you know, like it's this Merkle root of all the different opeturns and all the different, you know, just contract state, all just boiled down into this one little, you know, 256-bit number that then gets put on chain as an address you transfer your dust output to. Okay, so that was pretty heady stuff. Hopefully you're tracking at least a portion of it, but that's essentially how RGB will keep track of data. I didn't even go into how it does transfers because that's quite complex, and then even more complex is how you verify a transfer. Yes, go ahead.
Is backing up a challenge for RGB? So like Bitcoin obviously is on the keys, but the client side seems like it might have a tougher time to back up and recover.
Yeah, well, so yeah, actually, that's something we solved at DIBA. So we make digital Bitcoin assets. We have a marketplace, and we also have a wallet. And this wallet, it's called Bitmask, and we implement the RGB protocol in it for a number of different uses, and which we'll go into some of these. And we also have like usernames in NIP5 and lightning addresses too, which is kind of neat. And in order to create this wallet, we created a library called Bitmask Core, and it uses some libraries you may have heard of called BDK. Like BDK is probably one of the more popular, like Bitcoin dev kit. Like it's cool. Like it's really useful. But we also use PayJoin dev kit, Nostr dev kit. We do not use Lightning dev kit just yet, but we do use like a custodial LND Hub X server. We also integrate. Well, at some point we're going to. We have the capability. Bitmask Core has the capability to integrate with DZ for Lightning swaps from L2 to L1 and back, like swap in, swap out type stuff. We have the call for that. We just don't have it in use in our wallet just yet. And we have something called Carbonado, which I haven't talked about yet. But then we have, and then we have RGB. We could also talk a little bit about how we derive keys, but that's actually kind of boring. So let's go into Carbonado. So what is Carbonado? It's basically it's this neat thing where we can encode data in a way that we can verify that it exists remotely without needing to download every single piece of that data. We can just ask for portions of it, and at random places in that data stream, and then we can just say, oh, you're keeping that data. We have a pretty good idea that the rest of it has integrity, and this right here, by the way, is a crate documentation page, but it's essentially it's an apocalypse-resistant data storage format for the truly paranoid. That's what we call it, and it's also the name Carbonado. A Carbonado is a black diamond, and so we thought it was like a really good name for a encrypted by default, highly durable storage format, and we use the wallet keys that we generate with. Like when you go to create your wallet, and it encrypts them with your password on your machine, but also it drives them from your mnemonic, your 24-word. We use 24 words mnemonic in Bitmask. When it derives it from that, it'll give you a key to encrypt the wallet data, and it does this end to end, and it allows you to put that data on our servers, but we can't know what's in it, and also you can keep a copy of it locally in your browser. And additionally, we've worked out a partnership with Start9 so that people can at some point in the future, likely next year, be able to start running their own Carbonado nodes and also their own Bitmask wallets, which is a web wallet, and they'll be able to access it on their own node itself, and use entirely non-DIBA infrastructure in order to operate and use anything that involves RGB or even Lightning or Bitcoin. And Carbonado, like, it includes a few different like encoding steps. We first compress the data, we then encrypt it, we then add 4 error correction codes to it, just so that if any portion of the data is lost, there's a good chance we're able to reconstruct the remainder of the data. And then we also have this, we use this thing called stream verification, which allows us to, we use this thing called like a Merkle hash that it's Blake 3, but you might have heard of like Blake 2 or Blake 2b. Blake 3 is similar, and it uses a special like hash algorithm that allows you to just kind of roll up to where the data was along with a checksum, and then you can you can then hash that data, just a portion of it. Say like, I want 1 kilobyte, 400 gigabytes into this 1 terabyte file. Give me that 1 kilobyte, and I'll double check it against my local 32-byte hash. And so, and if you gave me that 1 kilobyte at that location, 400 gigabytes in, I could then cryptographically prove that you gave me the right data. And that's a really powerful concept for if you're giving someone else, a terabyte worth of data. You want to be able to prove over time that they're keeping it, and but you don't want to have to download like an entire copy of it over again to make sure and hash that locally, just to make sure that they're doing what you expected them to do. And how do we use it? We just we have a couple methods in Bitmask Core that we call store and retrieve, and you need a master hex secret key for both storing and retrieving. Storing, you need to you ordinarily only need a public key for encryption, but you need a private key for signing, and we sign the data when you store it as a means of authentication. And so you still need the secret key whenever you go to store data, and also to retrieve and decrypt data from Carbonado. And if you want to, so it's encrypted by default. All data has to be encrypted. But if you want to store like data that is between 2 peers, you can create a key between just the 2 peers using something called Diffie-Hellman, which I won't go into, but it's a way to like create new keys between 2 peers. And then there's also, if you want to store like public information, then you'll have a node that does Diffie-Hellman with its own keys and like a public key for the user storing public data on your server. And it'll, even though the data might be available publicly unencrypted, it'll be at rest encrypted. And so if, for example, you were running your server with just your encryption key in memory, and you had, another server that it reached out to that said, that gave it that key whenever it needed it. And then, like you wanted to operate a server where anybody could upload whatever files they wanted, and you're not, you're not going to be moderating or like censoring these files, then you basically need to have encryption. And if the FBI ever comes down knocking down your doors, they just get a big pile of 1s and 0s that they can't make sense out of. And that's kind of the point of Carbonado. And so like we're very paranoid about just like, all the different scenarios in which it was designed for. And also, we like to consider it apocalypse resistant as well. So it has it's protected against bit rot or like gamma rays or like cosmic rays or like coronal mass ejection. If you have georedundancy, we actually have we have encoding for where the data is on the planet and also in space. for the headers. And so you can actually encode in Carbonado, in the metadata, like where your data is on the planet. And so that way you can know geographically how distributed it is. And that way, and it's built into the protocol. And so that way you can just know if you know how many copies of data are out there, because you can prove that there's multiple copies of it, because you can reach out to those peers and you can say, are you keeping, my 1 kilobyte here and there? And then they claim to, be in this geographic location. If you have enough of them and enough places, you should be good against, Carrington event, like a big solar flare, like we're just thinking this through, and like the reason we think this through also is like there's a bunch of people inscribing a bunch of shit to Bitcoin, to the time chain, thinking like they're getting data permanence. And like it's like, well, okay, like what you really want is archival, dude. And we can solve for archival. There are way better ways, in my opinion, to solve for archival than running it to like 10,000, 20,000 different nodes, right? And 1 megabyte at a time, like that, and at a cost that's like 1 billion times more expensive than Amazon S3, by the way. So like it's incredibly impractical to archive data that way, and it's also but there is demand for it. There is a desire for that data permanence, and for us to satisfy the demand, we just need to go off chain, and we just need to be really clever about how we solve it, and that's kind of the point of RGB as well. And so like if there's just like anything that I want you guys to like take from this presentation is, we can solve whatever people want to solve with Bitcoin using layers. We don't need shitcoin protocols on other protocols. Like those are just, people call them testnets for Bitcoin, and that's. Like, they can go prove the concept, they can prove the market, they can go and, defraud investors, whatever, right? But if it's serious enough, people will come and find a way to make it work on Bitcoin because it's worth it.
Quick question on Carbonado. Do you have some concept of like how efficient the storage is? Like, I'm curious, like if you have 3 locations storing the data, is the size of the data 3x, 2.5x, 1x? Like, what is your redundant drive kind of analogy?
Yeah, you'll have a replication factor of 3x in that regard. So then you'll have like 3 copies of the data.
But it's literally 3 copies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if like there was some compression built into the whole thing. In the same way you might have a NAS with 5 drives and all.
We do have like forward error correction encoding, and you could use that if you wanted to like save data while also being geographically redundant. However, I wouldn't recommend that because, like, from like a apocalypse standpoint, you want a full copy of that data right where you're at. Like, you don't want to have to like reach out to other different sites just to reconstruct the data, in my opinion.
And theoretically, you could just be like, I'm willing to pay a little bit more, so I'll do 5x instead of 3x or whatever.
Exactly. Okay. And also, technically, the data that you put into Carbonado gets doubled in size because we use 4 of 8 correction code, forward error corrections and codes. So basically half the data has to be missing, and we actually, even if half the data is missing, we can still reconstruct the data. But 51%, that's a different story. So where we going with Bitmask? We're working on swaps tech right now that we're really excited about. So swaps allows us to do stuff like Strike does, just like in a KYC free peer-to-peer manner. We could do that with the Tether issuance that RGB is getting. And so you could just imagine, like, if you had an app that you sign in with your Nostr account and you had like your Nostr peers, your followers, whatever, and like those are your contacts. And so like kind of like how Venmo or Cash App or Strike has contacts, where you send, your money to your peers. We want to have that capability in Bitmask, and we don't think it'll be a lot. It's not going to be much more difficult based on things that we've already developed for selling our unique digital assets. And so we could, take the same technology we use to sell, fine art, let's say, or digital assets, or whatever you want to call it, fine digital art. Actually, we could take that same technology and apply it to, the people who might want to swap Bitcoin and dollars without needing to KYC, because it's just between two peers, and because RGB contracts are just they don't involve any they don't have to involve anybody else. They can just be a thing between two peers, and so that happens between two peers, including a swap, right? And so that then means that DIBA could go under, and you'd still be able to use this app, and you would still have the capability to buy and sell Bitcoin for dollars and with your friends in just the app itself. And I think that's kind of cool. So yeah, that would be something neat once we get that working. There's another wallet, RGB wallet called Iris that's only for Android, but it's actually really good. And so if you have an Android phone, definitely look into Iris, RGB, I guess, and it'll be an RGB wallet that you can go and play with RGB with in your phone. And also you can and I'll be giving a demonstration if we have the time. But yeah, and then there's some other stuff. So let's go into a few more things. So one thing that we think about a lot is we built this really cool tech for Bitcoin, but then how do we scale it? And one thing we're investigating is using more of Liquid to scale RGB, but that's not perfect for us. We would like something more decentralized and or at least have better security guarantees and
Trust minimized.
Yeah, trust minimized. Yeah, it's good. It's a good way to put it. And so and so we like to think Prime could be a good candidate for that. And so Prime, what it does is it's anchored to Bitcoin. So it's secured by Bitcoin by what we call a mining seal. And actually, I haven't really got into single-use seals much. I meant to do that, but anyway, it's just this thing that anyone can spend, but if you're following the Prime protocol correctly, you're going to add a taproot commitment to it that includes a proof Merkle tree, which is basically a Merkle tree of all the transactions that are going to go into the Prime network that a Prime miner might want to come up with. They'll go ahead and commit to that in this anyone can spend, and then they'll when they have that commitment, then they'll go and spend that, and when it gets mined, it'll be the new block essentially for Prime. And if somebody wants to DDoS the network instead, you can kind of reboot the network. Instead of using anyone can spend, you can just use kind of a reboot transaction, and it'll pick up where it left off. And then it's only good for single-use seals. So single-use seals are basically what RGB uses a UTXO for, and it's just like a thing that you can put data into and use just once. And this allows for, like, just like a lot of transactions per second. Like it's a lot. Maybe I shouldn't say unbounded, but it's a lot. Also, there is one problem with it, though, is that it requires node interactivity for you to be able to spend your UTXOs. And what I mean by that is, for you, it would be like if you wanted to spend your UTXOs now, you needed a wallet node running, keeping track of like other of all the blocks happening in the Prime network, and it would need to pick up just a little bit of data for every block and keep track of that for you to be able to prove that you can spend your UTXO. And this is really good for like high volume transactions, like back and forth, like just like it might be a good alternative to Lightning or Arc. And one of the best things is it requires no changes to Bitcoin. There are definitely some flaws, but there's benefits to this too. The benefits are like the volume of transactions, but then the flaws is data availability and the interactivity needed. And there's another issue is that it needs RGB to work. So like for it to be like a single use, for it to like work with seals, it needs like to keep the client side validated data off chain, and it will then it can't actually like transfer Bitcoin UTXOs. It doesn't have like Bitcoin in the protocol itself. It has to be like a token that represents Bitcoin, RGBTC. And in order for you to get RGBTC, you need something like Radiant, which is this thing that uses state channels, that uses a technology that that has been developed for actually a good amount of time now. It just hasn't seen a lot of use because we haven't had a lot of need for it up until this point. But basically, it's kind of similar conceptually to BitVM, except it's more like if BitVM was running in Lightning nodes instead. That might be a way to kind of think about Prometheus. And it can then arbitrate a multi-sig between some randomly chosen parties, and it can handle peg in and peg out of decentralized issued RGBTC. And this also requires no changes to Bitcoin. And finally, there's Abraxas, which is another layer 1 alternative that solves for for interactivity and data availability by kind of simplifying the way we encode seals and data into a block, and to the point where like we only need maybe about 2 bytes to represent the equivalent of a UTXO, and then like 1 bit in a bitmask, or like a bitmap actually, to validate whether it's been spent or not. It's like a UTXO set almost. We use a bitmap for that, and it's just like it's just a highly optimized way to determine whether something has been spent or not. And we use ZK Starks to turn the transactions into these highly optimized seals. It is not a lot of data per year, and since it's seals only, we like to think it's spam resistant. So like you're not like going to be cramming a bunch of data into any witness here. There's not a lot of like programmability here. It's really just to like see if something's been spent or not. It's great for monetary applications, especially like if you're looking to hold your tokens for a while, and Like, you don't want to keep a node operating for a while. You just want to keep your keys. It should be more familiar to Bitcoiners. And this also requires no changes to Bitcoin, which is like a recurring theme in RGB. We don't want to change Bitcoin, mostly because it's just like in many ways it like kind of compromises there's certain like it's kind of important sometimes to have a solid foundation to build upon. And if we're going to change the world's money, we need to be that solid foundation. We need to make sure that we don't break it. And so we want to be really conservative and really clever, and so that we don't have to we want to exhaust the problem space as much as possible before ever even considering alternatives like BIP300 drive chains or just different changes to Bitcoin. Like maybe they're useful, maybe they're necessary to help these layers out, but I think it's neat to think about them conceptually, but ultimately there's certain principle, kind of a principled stance you can take from that. But there's also a practical standpoint, which is just that by creating systems that require no changes to Bitcoin, that is permissionless. And so we don't have to lose our minds by engaging in social discourse with the community. We can just be awesome builders in our own right.
Can I ask you on that level? So your deep knowledge of the situation, that's pushed out any sort of change to Bitcoin you could possibly imagine needing anytime soon. There's no need to change anything as far as you.
It's very likely. It's very likely. Yeah.
Because my question was gonna be, is there any BIPs on the horizon that you think would be really helpful to what you're doing or anything? But you're focused on let's not do any of that.
Well, I think it's important that we try to just find try other things first before we reach for that. We kind of need to prove that it can't be done any other way.
Yeah.
I think that would be better. So being conservative, erring on the side of conservatism in that regard is important, because we can't say, actually no, we'd rather not have BIP300 drive chains. That was a terrible idea, because that's a hard fork, So anyway, we have a decent sized developer ecosystem so far. We have quite a few different GitHub orgs. We have a number of different just entities working in it. There's a team at Bitfinex. There's some people in Switzerland. You might have heard of them, Dr. Orlovsky and Dr. Ukalova, and they both have worked very hard to make RGB a thing. And then the Bitfinex folks have worked very hard at making it production ready. And then we at DIBA have worked very hard at making it work in the web and be really shiny and cool. So, and if you want to learn more about RGB, there's some good resources here. I'm going to make these slides available in the Telegram chat so that you guys can go and just check them out. And so that's about it.
Presentation. I get questions.
So what are your expectations for a trickle down? What is being stored on chain? There is some commitment to on chain somewhere in
it's
this.
just UTXO that's being spent. The fact that it's being spent is the data.
Okay, and then where my mind goes there is if I'm spending money, I'm just doing a money thing. But I've got a data field that's not doing anything. There's theoretically a market for that, right? I could even out of charity say, well, this person over here is doing, or like the RGB network is doing all this stuff, and they need to record this on chain. I have all of this space I'm not using in my UTXO. Can I offer that to you, the RGB chain, that kind of thing? Like, could there be a market for storing chain data? Because I'm not storing data, I'm just storing monetary
Well,
transactions.
storing the off-chain data, I think, is what you would want to store.
Well, yeah.
I know you're hashing all this off-chain stuff down to like a very, very tiny little thing.
Right.
But that still has to be
But
stored on chain.
there's still the client-side validated data that needs to be kept track of in wallets. And that's why we developed Carbonado to act as like a way to easily archive and for a long time this important data that like if you lose it you can't spend your assets. And so we want to make sure that like it's very durable and yes, we think there's a market for storing data in that way, like having like incredibly valuable data, like as valuable as a diamond, right? You can hand it to somebody else, and then you can say you have a camera on that diamond and see, are they keeping my diamond safe? Like that kind of thing. That's kind of why we developed Carbonado. Yeah.
I think maybe what you're missing is that like say a unique digital asset or a tethered dollar or something. None of that information ever goes on chain. It's
Yeah.
always in wallets. And then certain wallets can be party to the negotiation of exchange of these notes.
Yeah, but there seems to be some sort of like, if it all goes nuclear and nobody trusts anybody, somewhere there's a hash that's stored on chain to be like, this is the last bit of thing that proves, like I can decode this hash that's stored on chain that proves that the data inside of my wallet, which is then...
It's not even a hash so much as a key. And so, like, that's what I was trying to describe during the deterministic Bitcoin commitments, that the hash goes into a transaction that gets put into a key. Like, there's a commitment in the Merkleized AST using Taproot. It uses Taproot magic to commit to an op return with a hash in it, and that gets turned into a key.
But that key is on chain.
Yes.
So tether, when they're minting some tethers, like that happens on chain, but from that point on, it doesn't go.
Actually, what's funny is issuance does not require a transaction. You can take an existing UTXO and say, I'd like to commit against that. But what you need to do is whenever you transfer, when you change the state of the contract, that's when you need to commit to the like a whole bunch of extra stuff, like to validate the state transitions that go into validating like new data going into that contract. So you compute new state transitions, you create new hash, you put it into DBC, you put it into a multi-protocol commitment, and then you put it on chain, and then that commitment there is.
But not every transfer is on chain. Only state transitions. What is the difference between a transfer and a state transition?
State transitions are like a more generalized, like not every contract includes the capability to transfer because it's not regarding tokens, but like every contract as it changes will include some form of state transition. And when you change the state of the contract, you need to commit to that data somewhere using a hash as like newly changed data, and then you'll send it to an address that has that cryptographic commitment. And because you've done that, then you can then say like I've changed this data. Here's some new data that follows the protocol rules. That says I've spent these tokens to you, and I'm sending the change back to myself, and that's a valid thing that can validate within the protocol and wallet itself, using only the Bitcoin blockchain and the client-side validated data. Yes.
Still don't get it.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really excited to come tonight because I was like, I feel like I'm gonna get so swamped, and I am so swamped.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, what's the timeline you think before when people start to realize like these capabilities as they start ditching all the other coins and tokens and building on?
Well, we think Tether might like the minute Tether starts issuing USDT to RGB, that's going to be a big milestone, and we think that'll likely happen before the next bull run. Whenever that happens, I guess.
Right.
I mean, the data that I have in my mind is the happening. I'm just thinking hopefully they'll have it before the happening. Yes.
I'm also very swamped, but super high level question, that contract, right? Is there any limit to the complexity that can be contained within that contract? Like, if have a contract and own 1,000 properties, for example, and we're going to exchange those, and all of the different data related to that, could that all be contained within that? And then how does that affect that on-chain transaction and the fee that might be associated with it?
Yeah, actually, so what's neat about that is if you're just using it to keep track of property, this is tokenized property, these are tokens, these are contracts, and it's only contracts. It doesn't involve say holding Bitcoin, right? Which might involve a multi-sig and something more complex. If you're just using it as a property register, this is a fantastic use case for Bitcoin. I mean, for RGB, because you're able to store so many different contracts against the UTXO, and so you can really minimize your fees while still being able to benefit from the security of Bitcoin and the trustlessness and the security. And so yes, that is a great use case for it. And are there limits to the complexity? There's always limits. Computers always need limits. Otherwise, you'll just you need to have limits. And so some of the limits are a contract can't be bigger than 16 megabytes. And this can actually include, for example, I didn't go into this, but there's actually a virtual machine that is also being developed that has the capability to execute Turing-complete instructions, basically just ordinary programming language type instructions, kind of how the EVM works, Ethereum style side-to-side thing works. You can do kind of similar stuff in terms of validation, and at least being able to validate whether you can do some really complex validations using LAVM, and that might also serve your property register use case.
So if you were, you could say I tokenize a piece of property, and then all of the data of that transaction is stored client side, but you publish to the chain a key. Having that key allows you to unlock all of the data regarding that property, and then if you sell that property to someone, that transaction is again stored client side, but you create a key that is again stored on chain, and so you can say, here's a tiny little piece of data that shows you that will unlock all of the data for the transaction, and here's the key that unlocks all the data about the properties themselves. That's somehow metaphorical in the area.
Well, kind of I wouldn't say keeping a key that unlocks data on chain.
Not on chain, I mean client side, the wallet.
When you say that, the way I would say it is, what you're putting on chain is a key that commits to what you just described, the property register, what you owned.
Well, it's like putting a public key on chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and I exchange a piece of property, and the only way for a third party to get to know what happened is for either of us to share that key.
Yeah.
And you could say that I have proof that the key exists because it's on chain.
To share the contract, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, which includes the public key.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because just a hash. You're taking the data, you're running it through a hash, and then you're storing that hash on chain.
essentially.
Public key.
Yeah, as a public key, yeah.
So it's just the transaction is just a public key and a signature, like what do you call it? The taproot. Everybody agrees thing. So there's not. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So the commitment of the asset that you're transferring never makes it to the chain at all, right? Is that true?
Well, I mean, there is a cryptographic commitment ultimately that makes it on chain.
Because there's a unique public key that now exists on chain that only you can prove with the associated inputs that you're storing client side.
And it includes a tap leaf that corresponds to your contract data. So because it includes the possibility of that leaf existing, that is included in the Merkle root of the mask commitment.
I mean, I feel like I get that before you spend, but then when you're, I guess I don't.
Well, if you put that data in your script path, then when you spend the keys, then you don't need to worry about the script path at all. Because you put it in the key, you have the key path and script path, and if you put the op return in the script path, which you do, then you just spend the key, and you don't put any scripts on chain. You're not running any scripts.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's the explanation.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a really general taproot question, but I know there's a lot of books about just Bitcoin in general and getting deep into Bitcoin. But is there any books that are
specifically
that you know of that teach you how does taproot work? Because it all seems so magical how this tap leaves work.
Well, I'll admit, I think there are some books that exist. I think Mastering Bitcoin, I think, is one that comes up. I need to put the time into that. I haven't read it. The way I know about all this stuff is just by using it. I'm privileged to this is my job I do every day, and I get exposure to these concepts on a daily basis. And so, fortunately, I at least have some familiarity with how they work on a surface level. But more than a surface level, maybe. But but yes, I think Mastering Bitcoin is probably a good one. Or I don't know.
So what if they have taproot? They don't stop at site.
Well, no, is it the latest edition that's on GitHub?
I'll check.
I know they have an updated version of one of the books.
I think so. Yeah, I think the 5th edition just came out or something like that.
Yeah. I think it just came out too. I think there's a new book even that includes taproot now. I think that's. But yeah.
So, question about this transfer. I'm just trying to visualize in my mind exactly how this transfer works. So somebody who wants to receive this asset, they make a taproot address that they already have and embedded. I'm gonna own this as soon as somebody pays it, right? Or I'm gonna be able to unlock whatever they're transferring. I guess I'm just wondering, how is it that the asset itself makes it over to the new person, and then the new person who has it can validate that they actually got it?
I haven't gone into tap tweaks, but do you know what a tap tweak is? Okay, so it's when you have an address already, but then you want to commit to. So you already have the address that your wallet would ordinarily generate, but then you generate a bunch of tap script stuff, and then you tweak your key, which is basically the way key tweaking is just you use say multiplication or addition. You just add another key to your key because they're numbers, you can just kind of overflow them, and then just make sure that it goes around, I guess.
So you just make sure you do the same thing in reverse before.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least you have the same data, so you can come to the same thing. And also, I think there was another thing that came to mind. Oh, blinded UTXOs. But let's not go into that. They're cool. But we can talk about that later. I actually didn't even have time to go into my whole demonstration of Bitmask, but that's okay because the internet here isn't that great, and it'd be pretty slow on my laptop. So
It's a beautiful wallet.
Well, Hunter, thank you, man.
Check it out. Yeah, take care.